You got to do what you got to do. You got to promote your stuff. But also, like, what you and Dallin are putting out there is like funny stuff. Like when I scroll through and I watch it, it makes me laugh.
Yeah,
and
I appreciate that.
We'll start right there. When I sent him a message this morning when I found out we were going to be like 5 minutes behind schedule, I was like, dude, I can't be late for Chris.
Yeah.
Because I've seen him say that too. I'm like, nobody wants to be late for the captain, dude.
Dude, I thought you were referencing that when you said that. So.
Yeah, I did not want to screw it up. So I want to start here. We're in March. You got a lot of experience in March, obviously. Yeah. ESPN analyst, played college basketball at Army. You coached for Duke. You guys had a championship run in 2010. Your 4 number 1 seeds. First of all, did you have this? Like Jay Billis had it, and I remember I watched him talk about it, and I was like, man, that's kind of a cop out. 4 number 1 seeds, but here we are, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of how the year has gone. You know, those 4 teams that are in that Final Four have been the best teams all year. Florida took a little bit longer to hit their stride than maybe those other 3. And in Alabama, you know, I got bamboozled a little bit by the way Auburn rather finished the season, losing 3 of 4. I thought they got, looking back on it now, Pete, I thought Auburn got a little bit bored with the end of the season. I think they had played so well and had been the best team for so long that, especially defensively, I thought they got a little bit bored by the end of the year, and I got bamboozled a little bit by how they were playing. But when you look at the 3 losses down the stretch of the season, I mean, 2 of them were to Elite 8 teams in Alabama and Tennessee, and the other was on the road at Texas A&M. So we've been gifted with this Final Four. I mean, this is the best thing that could have happened for the sport. You know, last couple of years, certainly last year, Purdue and UConn had separated from the rest of the field. I think we had 4 teams this year that did that, and we're all going to see them in San Antonio.
The 4 number 1 seeds, is that an aberration, or you think that's where we're headed as a sport?
No, I think it's not necessarily an aberration, but I don't think I'm not driving a referendum like a lot of people are. A, on the sport, and B, on the tournament from this result. We get different things every year, man. It's just the way that this thing goes. And I think there's so much pressure. The standard for college basketball to meet people's expectations, and most of them are people who don't watch the sport during the regular season. They parachute into a 3-week tournament, and they drive these sweeping referendums off of results year to year. I mean, if we had 6 mid-majors in the Sweet 16, people would have complained about that, you know, would have driven a different referendum on where the sport is at. It's just kind of what this tournament has become. So no, I don't think it's an aberration. I don't think it has anything to do with NIL. I think it's just sort of the way this thing has fallen out, and given, you know, kind of where the sport was this year, we just got a real chalky Sweet 16, and obviously the chalkiest you could get in this Final Four.
You talked about Auburn, and that brings me to my next question. The conference tournaments, like we saw what Michigan did, right?
Yeah.
And it didn't seem to have a ton of impact on their seeding. Vice versa, we saw what Auburn did. Didn't have a ton of impact on their seeding. What do you make of the conference tournaments? Are they still impactful for the way that we're seeding and the way that we move into March for the tournament?
Yeah, I think so from a team perspective. I mean, it depends on the coach. Like, you know, for example, you mentioned that national championship we won in 2010 when I was at Duke. We won the ACC championship. And what I think people need to understand is, like, that's the first time all year that you play a game where if you lose, you are out of the tournament. Like, all regular season, no matter what happens in the game you're playing, there's always another game to prepare for the next day. So win or lose, you are moving on with your season. The conference tournament is the first time where that's not the case, where if you lose, you go home. And I think that matters, especially for teams that want to win, that want to win a national championship. And it's interesting, of the Final Four, 3 of those teams won their conference tournament championship. Like I said, we did in 2010. And I think it was a big part of us moving forward, you know, sort of understanding the dynamics of that one and done element to which is college basketball. So I think it's important. I understand coaches looking at it differently. I understand the desire to be healthy. It was interesting every year, not every year. There were years where Coach K would kind of be like, you know, it'd be okay if we lost in this thing. But the competitor comes out, then we'd get into the games and he's like, you know, screaming and yelling at everybody. And it's like, oh, I thought it was okay if maybe we lost this game. So I think they matter. But to your point, it has proven out that they do not matter for seeding. The committee does not factor that in.
You make a great point, though. It matters for the kids. It matters for the guys, like for them to understand the stakes of the whole deal, almost to have that impact. Like, wow, we lost and now we're going home. Now maybe we get a chance to rest up, but at the same time, it does sort of make it very obvious. Like, this is the high stakes situation we're in now as we get into March.
Yeah. And the preparation piece too is another important part of it. You get it a little bit during feast week, where you have a game the next day. So you got to prepare overnight for another opponent. Now feast week, you don't have that one and done. Like, even if you lose day one, you're going to have a game the next day in the losers bracket, but you're still playing. The piece of having to prepare in a hotel ballroom, having to do a quick scout, and in the conference tournaments, you've prepared for those teams during the regular season, but you get the point. That's another element to, that quick turnaround, and that quick preparation piece is very important.
I appreciate you kind of taking us behind the curtain, and you took me behind the curtain earlier this year. That kind of, again, the Spatola segue into the next question. We chatted this year. We had a game at Baylor, and you kind of were shedding some light on the scheduling situation with college basketball and how that could be changed. Conversations you've had with Coach K, other people in college basketball, about all of our big games in college basketball are front loaded to the early portion of the calendar, where A, there's not a ton of eyeballs on them, and B, they do have such a say in how the rest of the season goes ranking wise. What do you make of where we're headed as a sport? And is that something that can be remedied anytime soon? So we do have a late season game, and it sucked because we got the one example, Illinois and Duke, and Illinois got crushed at the Garden this year. So it's like, what, you could say, why the hell would you want to play that game if you're Illinois?
Yeah, I still think that game was good for Illinois, even though you lose.
Really?
I think, yeah, I do, because I think you learned they were actually better. Following that game, look. We do the schedule. We continue to do the schedule the way we do, Pete, because it's the way we've always done it. And if you looked at the sport in the context, some of which you just mentioned, we're playing a large portion of the season while football is still going on. We are playing our most important games when it comes to tournament selection, and we are also playing our most compelling games in terms of the entertainment product we're producing. We're playing those games at the point in the season when we have the fewest people watching the sport. So, and this is not a novel idea. I just think we need to, Jay Billis has talked about this before. I just think we need to amplify this more. If we want this to be a continuing entertainment product, and we want to continue to, especially in the months of January, February, and the beginning of March, we want to drive eyeballs to our sport, then we need to put the best games and the best brands and the best venues out there for public consumption. And in the way you do that, part of the problem, Pete, is as these conferences have grown, the majority of them are playing 20 conference games.
Yeah.
But half of those games, and that's conservative, I would say, for example, in the ACC, it's 3/4 of those games nobody cares about, because the bottom halves of these leagues, that league in particular, those aren't good teams. Not only that, like if you're Duke, the conversation with Duke is, well, they haven't been challenged. Well, he tried by playing that Illinois game. He tried by playing games in November and December. But John Shire's playing a conference schedule that well, we'll see. But you could argue did not prepare that team as best it could, going into the NCAA tournament. So I just think we need to flip the schedule. Now, this takes there's a lot of logistics that go around that. All these conferences have to get on board. We've got to shift the conference schedules more towards November, December. Save your great conference games, the rivalry games, the best brands, save those for later in the calendar. I just think we need to look at it differently than we have.
Chris, you still there?
Yeah. Did you lose me?
Yeah, Scotty, I lost the monitor, but it's only my monitor. I can still, you can still see me. I can see you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
All right. So I wanted to ask you a question about, you mentioned that whole retooling of the schedule. Is that even possible? Are we living in a world where that could happen over the course of the next few years?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest hurdle is getting, especially the conference commissioners to agree that in principle and conceptually, this is something that the sport needs. First of all, getting them to agree on anything is almost an impossibility. And getting them to agree on anything related to basketball is always going to take a back seat, Pete. It just is. But like I said, the way we are doing this schedule is archaic. And the reason we continue to do it the way we are doing it is because it's the way it's always been done. If you came down from outer space and you looked at the way that college basketball is doing its schedule right now, you would never do it the way we're doing it. You would completely flip it from the way that we're doing it. You would play the majority of these conference games in November, December, and you would schedule some of these. And look, some of those conference games you would keep in February and early March. But the majority of those games in those months would be those non-conference juicy brands and venues that we want.
All right, so take me into the Final Four now. A lot of excitement around this. We mentioned the 4 number 1 seeds. It is great. It really is great. I think you got a lot of interest from around the country. My heart is with Houston because, I'm a prisoner of the moment. You get a chance to do some Houston games. You fall in love with Kelvin Sampson. What does your head tell you when you look at this field in the Final Four? Again, like, it'd be so great to see Kelvin Sampson reach the mountaintop, and win a championship. But Duke is in the way. And right now it is really hard for me to fathom a team beating them right now, even with the tenacious defense that Houston plays. And then you have the whole other side too. We're not even talking about Florida right now.
Yeah, I think first of all with Houston Duke, look, the one concern if you're Shire is the physicality of that game and how Duke handles it. I mean, Duke's big, but they start 3 18-year-olds. And if you look at Houston, those are grizzled men, up and down, they're grizzled men. And so, how does that manifest? Something like that hasn't really bothered Duke during the year, but that would be the one concern if I'm Shire. The fact of the matter, Pete, in this game is I think it comes down to the offensive end. As much as we've made about both of these defenses, the reason Duke is dominating at this point, their defense has been there all year. The reason Duke is dominating right now is offensively. In the 4 games in this tournament, they're averaging 91 points a game. They're shooting 56% from the field, and they're shooting 47% from 3. They're shooting the hell out of the basketball. They're incredibly unselfish. They're averaging 19 assists a game, and they're only turning it over about 7 times a game. Now, they did have 13 turnovers in that Alabama game. That hurt them a little bit in moments. But it's their offense, dude. They never take a bad shot. They just don't. And when you don't turn it over, you don't take a bad shot. And then you've seen the number of guys and the number of ways that they can score the basketball. It's incredibly imposing. My fear for Houston and by the way, Duke in practice every day plays against its own defense. So there's some scheme stuff that Houston does, 2 to the ball, the aggression that will be different for Duke. But ultimately for me, man, can Houston score enough?
Yeah.
Can that offense that, they're shooting the ball better. They shoot it, 40% from 3. They don't shoot a great volume. And I don't
think. And it still doesn't seem like, we talk about that. That's been the narrative. Oh, they got so much better shooting wise. Here's Emmanuel Sharp and LJ Cryer, and it's the best 3-point shooting team they've had all year. And sometimes I still don't see it come to fruition. Like, it's not worrisome, right? Their offensive attack. It just still is not.
And they will take a bad one. Like they will take a bad one. So that would be my thing for them is like Alabama had put up 113 against BYU. They had 65 against Duke. Can Houston score enough would be my concern.
All right. We look at the Final Four and in your history in the Final Four. Is there a guy, before I get to your history, that, I mentioned this in a conversation with you, John Wallace. I remember I was in college and, he had that tournament where he just caught fire, right? And they lost to Kentucky. That was the one in Jersey. And he ended up getting drafted in the first round by the Knicks. It was probably a little overvalued, but again, he had an incredible tournament. Is there a guy this year you think that could emerge, that could become a household name, at least from March into April into May, that can really make a splash here?
A guy who's playing great and maybe people don't know his name necessarily, and I think he's a real X factor for Duke, is Tyrese Proctor, shooting the heck out of the basketball. I mean, the point in the first and second rounds, what he did to Baylor. To me, he's the X factor. When you get to this point in the tournament, Pete, like all 4 of these teams can defend, and all 4 of them are going to be really good. Good teams are good at taking the best player out of the game. And so I think in both of these games, like for Duke, I think it's a Tyrese Proctor. Is there a game where he goes for 6 threes? Is there 7 threes? He has a big number. Like that's going to be, against Houston, it's not the guy coming off of the screen roll. It may not be the guy catching the first pass, but it's that second pass, that hockey assist where a guy on the opposite side is getting that 3. A Jawan Roberts is another guy that I think is big in this game against Duke. Can he have a game where he goes for 15 and 13 and people are like, who's this guy who's been playing 6 years for Kelvin Sampson?
Yeah.
Like, who's this guy, Jawan Roberts? So guys like that, like, I don't think it's the obvious. I think to your point, and John Wallace was a great player for Syracuse, obviously, but I think this tournament is going to be about those. It was Thomas Houck for Florida in that Elite Eight game. For Auburn, it could be any of those guys. Could be Pettiford, could be Miles Kelly, could be Denver Jones. They got a lot of those types of guys. I think in this Final Four, it's that one X factor for one of those or two of those teams that can explode.
Couple more for you before I get you out of here. What the hell happened to Texas Tech?
Yeah.
I was bummed about that. I mean, because with 2 minutes left, I felt like, wow, they just might be the better team. Even after Florida had made their little run, I was like, they're physical. I felt like they were manhandling the Gators. And then there you go. That 2 minutes that'll make you a champion, that Texas Tech will probably have another chance at here in the next few years to prove that they're equipped, but they just didn't have what it took. What did you see happen?
I think two things. First of all, you have to make free throws. I mean, that's the obvious. You miss two front ends of a 1-and-1. That's bad. It doesn't get much better than that, worse than that. And then look, the other team has a lot to do with this. I mean, sometimes in that comeback, like we focus on Walter Clayton's 2 threes that cap the game, but to come back when you're down 9 with 3 minutes left, somebody's got to light the match, and it was Thomas Houck. He grabs that offensive. They're down 9 with 3 minutes left. He grabs that offensive rebound, bangs down a 3. Then he comes down the next 2:30 left. They're down 6. He bangs down another 3. And then Walter Clayton Jr., your closer, snatches the game. And that's where when you're down 9 with 3 minutes left, you're almost playing with nothing to lose. It's crazy to say, but you're down 9, 3 minutes left. Let's fire away. And then all of a sudden, like I said, that you light the match. And now and then there's 2 missed free throws. And now all of a sudden you've done it against UConn. Remember, I mean, Florida has been outplayed for 32 minutes against UConn, and they were outplayed for 37 minutes against Texas Tech. They've been outplayed in this tournament more than they have outplayed their opponent, but they have that guy. And when you have that guy, that closer, that finisher, like a Walter Clayton Jr. this time of year in these games, that is a real separator, a real difference maker.
Yeah, it's a real peace of mind type deal, I would imagine, for the rest of the team as well. A couple more things for you. All right. Kevin Willard, do you like the hire?
I like the hire. I pause. First
that was
of all,
a pause, Chris. Yeah,
it was.
Yeah.
First of all, the way he handled the whole thing at Maryland, it was not a good look. And so, does that factor in? I think it'll be forgotten as he gets to Villanova, but that's what are we doing there? I wasn't a big fan of how all that went down. The other thing, Pete, I think he's a good coach. 3 years at Iona before he went to Seton Hall, 3 years at Iona, never made the tournament. Then he gets the job at Seton Hall, and he's a Big East guy. He's Ralph Willard's son. They're Big East folks. He's from New York. That's where he ultimately wanted to be. Seton Hall, he's there for 12 years. He went to the tournament 6 times and never made it. I don't think he ever made it past the second round.
No, he didn't.
So, the hire at Maryland was a little bit of a dubious one for me. First of all, it's not really his DNA, and the success at Seton Hall was good, but it wasn't overwhelmingly good. Now, he did a good job in the 3 years. I mean, he makes the Sweet 16 this year. He made the second round 2 years ago. So it was a good job with a Maryland program that had been down. But is this the guy who's going to bring Villanova back? You know that program better than I, so I won't speak to the NIL and sort of, the infrastructure there. But just from a coaching perspective, I like him, but I wasn't like, well, Villanova's got to get Kevin Willard. Time will tell. I think he's a good coach, but the success where he's been has not been overwhelming.
All right, so the Social Replay is the show with Dallin Cuff and Chris Spatola. First of all, you have to watch it because it's funny. I mean, that's the number one thing. It's funny, and it makes you laugh. And there's also a ton of insight. You can catch him on Sirius XM. Of course, incredible ESPN analyst. Had the chance to work with you a bunch of times, Chris. You're the man. Here is one more question for you. When everything settles down at home in Durham, North Carolina, and you're just ready to chill with the wife, what show are you watching right now?
Ooh, good one. We are big Righteous Gemstones fans. Big. And then I have finally gotten her into White Lotus. For some reason, she was like not into that, but I convinced her because Walter Goggins, who's in Baby Billy
Yes.
from Righteous Gemstones, he's also in this season of White Lotus. So I finally got her turned over to White Lotus, and so we are caught up on both and love both. But it was Walter Goggins and showing the dong in the last 2 episodes, showing the dong, making all of us average sized dudes feel good about ourselves as he's water skiing with the dong swinging in the wind. It was the Walter Goggins that tipped her onto White Lotus. So that's what we're into now, brother.
Chris Spatola, man, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I will be in touch, man.
You're the best. Thanks, Pete.
All right, see you, Chris. Chris, man, that was awesome, dude.
All right, I know you're a